Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, everybody. Lisa K. Donner here for Liberty Nation, and we have our weekly roundtable starring Tim Donner, my better half, Graham J. Noble, our chief political correspondent, and Scott D. Cosenza, our legal affairs editor. So this week, all that everybody is talking about is Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Seems he's gotten himself into some hot water, and we had Jonathan Turley, the George Washington law professor, who admitted that Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' lawyer, was one of his students. Kind of interesting little bit of trivia there. But anyway, Turley said that Cohen isn't a credible enough witness to go the distance and lacks the evidence necessary to sustain an impeachment fight. What say you all? Who wants to go first?
Well, I could go first if you want. It seems that whether the president is in trouble, it depends on whether they can prove that actual campaign money was used to pay off Stormy Daniels and the other subject of Trump's infidelity or affairs or whatever it was. Otherwise, if they can't prove that it's campaign money, then it's just another case of hush money, and God knows how many times that's been used in politics, and then it becomes a political matter. And whether enough voters will bite at the idea that Trump is corrupt, seems to me it depends on if they think this is worse than the Access Hollywood tape. Because if they don't, it won't mean much of anything, because Trump won a decisive victory, we must remember, by 14% in the Electoral College just a month after that Access Hollywood tape.
All right, Tim, but you're taking the tack that this is simply a payoff for I guess a prostitution situation. I mean, Scott, from a legal standpoint, is that how we need to look at it?
The Congress can vote to impeach the president regardless of whether or not a conviction of a federal crime has taken place. So I think we should need to kind of bifurcate or separate things out. Trump, because of the revelations that we now know because of Michael Cohen's plea agreement and assertions he made to the court for that plea, Donald Trump is behind the eight ball for federal criminal jeopardy for election campaign finance violations. Now that is, whether or not he gets convicted of that he could not get convicted of that, but still be subject to impeachment. And then there's removal. So there's sort of three things in the air. I think that there's the criminal case, there's an impeachment case, and then there's a removal case.
All right. But to be convicted, Scott, you have to be indicted. And Graham, as I understand it, a president can't necessarily be indicted.
Well, there's constitutional scholars and many other people who think they are constitutional scholars love to discuss whether or not a sitting president can be indicted. And according to, just based on the wording of the Constitution, the answer is you have to err on the side of no, according to the the wording of the Constitution. And obviously, the Justice Department also says that no, that is not the case. But I've got 1,000 other thoughts in my head, all running along the lines of this. Our whole thing is complete nonsense from beginning to end. It's rubbish. But I'll just kind of condense down one or two thoughts that I do have, and that is that no one in their right mind, no congressman in their right mind, Republican or Democrat, is going to impeach a president over campaign finance violations. That would be such an insanely stupid thing to do, considering that, the Hillary Clinton was guilty of campaign finance violations. We know that for a fact. Barack Obama had to pay huge amounts of fines for campaign finance violations. And campaign finance violations, it's hard to say those three words over and over again in a row. but that stuff has gone on 1,000 times in 1,000 previous campaigns. It will go on in 1,000 future campaigns. You know, anyone who's stupid enough to talk about impeaching a president over that issue is just they're insane. And I can tell you a whole bunch of other reasons why the president will never be impeached at all. But that's my 2 cents on the campaign finance.
Let me just ask this, Tim. Dinesh D'Souza went to prison for it.
Well,
He
Dinesh
violated
D'Souza,
campaign finance laws.
it's an entirely different case. It seems to me that this is a he said. Who has the credibility, Michael Cohen or Donald Trump? And in the case of maybe a third to a half of the American people, they don't know for sure. But it's interesting how the left can change its allegiances. Joe Schaefer's written a piece this week about how the left, which despises the intelligence community, suddenly is embracing the CIA as a paragon and a foundation of the American democracy. Likewise, Michael Cohen, who's been accused of being everything from a sleazebag to a bagman to a murderer, I don't know, whatever, from the left. Now suddenly he's a hero, and his lawyer, Lanny Davis, is out on MSNBC, I think it was, or maybe CNN.
He was on Fox today.
People,
he was on Fox.
Imploring people to give money for the Michael Cohen Defense Fund. So, you know, the left's embrace of Michael Cohen is really quite ironic, and I don't think it's going to be lost on the American people that they suddenly find him to be credible. And it all comes down to his credibility. He can say anything he wants.
I think that everybody makes a mistake if you think that they won't act in a manner that, for you and I, is plain to see is beyond hypocritical. I think that the Democrat leadership has demonstrated that they will act in a way that is beyond hypocritical, that is outrageous, that subjects Trump to standards that they wouldn't subject themselves to in a race for dog catcher. I expect that he will be impeached, and I expect that they will tear this nation apart because their candidate didn't get in, because Hillary lost. And they have yet to wrestle with that reality, and I think that they'll continue to avoid it.
Scott, you bring up Scott, you bring up an interesting point, because earlier this week we saw a memo from it was I believe to Judge Starr from Brett Kavanaugh, and I wouldn't even allow it to be shown on our site, because the questions that he planned to ask Bill Clinton, which were obviously based on Monica Lewinsky's testimony, were so grotesque and sexually deviant that, I thought it was problematic. So are we looking at a double standard here?
Well, one thing that I was taught certainly by everyone at the Gray Lady, at NBC, CBS, ABC, you name it down the line, is that it's not appropriate to judge private sexual conduct when we're considering our leadership in this country. And that was for a president, excuse me, Tim, that was for a president who had sexual relations with an unpaid intern of 21 or 22 years old, I think, when she was in D.C. And now we have a situation where Donald Trump is alleged, and I think we can drop the alleged at this point, certainly had a one-night stand with a porn star. Is it 20? How many years ago was it? Anyway, long before he was...
Right, long time ago.
Long before he ran for president. And so he didn't corrupt this woman, and he didn't use his power in order to gain sexual advantage over her inappropriately, which I think is what the problem is with this the people who do the Me Too thing and the problem with the Lewinsky thing. He also didn't subject himself to blackmailable behavior. For those of us who care about the security situation in America, that is one of the major things that was wrong with what Bill Clinton did. We know for sure that the Mossad had copies of the phone sex tapes that Bill Clinton had with Monica Lewinsky, and we presume that other regimes had those tapes as well, if one intelligence service has it. So he opened America up to some serious problems. So I don't think there is a likeness here. Donald Trump didn't want people to know that he had relations with Stormy Daniels, and here's where we are.
All right, Tim, you were going to say?
Well, I don't exactly remember what I was going to say because Scott tends to go on so long. But, Michael Cohen wouldn't be the first defendant to turn over, a version of a story that was different than the person defending themselves. If there's no way to prove what Michael Cohen says, and you can't think that Trump was stupid enough to put anything into writing, that if they can't prove it, it becomes a he said, and Michael Cohen, a guy who recorded a conversation with his own client, which is beyond unethical, recorded it without his knowledge. This is a man that will do or say anything to get himself out of trouble. And even though he's the left's new best friend and they're raising money for his defense fund, it clearly is a case where it's the credibility of the witness. Now, the left will say he's entirely credible. The right will say he has no credibility, and it will be up to the voters this November and then ultimately in 2020 to decide who has more credibility, Michael Cohen or Donald Trump.
All right, Graham, I'm going to give you the last word. You have been very patient.
It's such a fascinating subject all around. I guess the way I look at it is I totally agree with Scott when he says that the Democrats are capable of acting in a way that no one else would consider rational or logical, and that they are willing to burn this country to the ground to get rid of Donald Trump. I totally believe that. However, I also have to look at it that an awful lot of Democrats in Congress must realize that the likelihood of Donald Trump, well, for a start, he's not going to get, even if he's impeached by the House, there's no way he's getting convicted in the Senate. The Democrats are not going to have the votes for that. But also, a lot of Democrats must understand that there is an extremely good chance that Donald Trump is going to win a second term. I would say that it's incredibly likely. And I think how many Democrats, even in the House, are going to want, when they go into their next election, when they're running for re-election for their House seats, how many of them are going to want on their bio voted to impeach Donald Trump? I'm not sure. Those in very, very deep blue districts, they're going to love that on their bio. But there's a lot of others that probably don't want that particular mark against their name. So I actually think that the Democrats are going to have a much harder time even impeaching Trump, let alone the unthinkable of convicting him in the Senate. So, I think the whole thing is just pie in the sky.
All right, lightning round. Let's go around the horn here. Is this the worst, most serious difficulty that the president has faced to his administration to date? Yes or no, Tim?
Yes, it's the worst crisis that he has faced this entire week.
All right.
Certainly.
Graham?
I'm not sure if it's the worst crisis Trump has faced, but I think it is the worst crisis this country has faced for a very long time.
Scott?
Lisa, just so people are aware, for those of us who may not have it on the front of our mind, Bill Clinton was impeached and ran for re-election and won re-election. So both of those things can happen.
All righty. Well, thank you very much for Graham Noble, Scott Cosenza, and Tim Donner. I'm Lisa K. Donner. Please check out LibertyNation.com. We have a new, improved website, and we'd love to have you join us. Thanks so much and having a great day.
Visit us at LibertyNation.com.